Hi, Dennis Weiss, Eagle Communications. Welcome to Why Like Ike. I have Jeff Nelson, and he's becoming my favorite because he brings the best stuff. Jeff, wow, we have a Renault tank and a World War I fighting implement, a shell that's been turned into a lamp, and we got a lot of stuff to talk about. So welcome to Why Like Ike.
Well, thank you. Today we're going to talk about World War I and a little more specifically some of the things that Eisenhower did in World War I and how it helped him develop into the officer that we would all know in World War II.
We're looking at a picture of our favorite general and president behind us as a young man, and we've determined about 1920, we think this picture was
This
taken.
picture would probably be about 1920, at the end of World War II, or World War I. Eisenhower, Dwight Eisenhower was in charge of a place called Camp Colt at Gettysburg, Virginia.
Heard of that place.
Or Gettysburg, Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
And Camp Colt was the first U.S. training camp for the Armor Corps. It was the first time the United States trained its soldiers to use tanks. Very much like this Renault tank that we have a model of here.
And am I correct, that was on the Gettysburg battlefield?
It was actually on the battlefield.
Isn't that amazing? Historic register place today, right?
Historic register place today.
If you dropped a soda can on it, the park ranger would rap you on the knuckles today, as he should. I'm not saying that they shouldn't. But this was a different place and a different time, and the Gettysburg battlefield was used to train our first tank corps.
Right.
I think that's significant.
10,000 U.S. soldiers.
And Dwight David Eisenhower was right there.
He was the commanding officer. It was not his preferred job. He lobbied very vociferously to be sent to the front in France and overseas. But very early in his career, his superiors saw that he was a very effective officer at training men and getting the most out of men. Mm-hmm. And they ended up keeping him in the U.S. For the entire time. Camp Colt was an unusual job for him. He was sent to Gettysburg with 500 men in March of 1918. By the end of summer, there were 10,000 men there.
Wow.
All meant to be trained how to operate these French light tanks. The only problem was he didn't have any tanks. He didn't get the first tank until June of 1918, and at the end he only had 3 French tanks, none of which came with any weaponry, so they didn't have any of the guns with them. So he had to kind of make do as he went along and kind of learn on the fly. He started several of his own training programs. He called his boss in Washington, D.C. and begged for some weapons. His boss said the only thing they had was some obsolete Navy 3-pounders. So he got some 3-pound guns and some machine guns, mounted them on flatbed trucks, and his men drove around the Gettysburg battlefield shooting up several of the hills for practice.
Isn't that interesting?
This lamp was a gift to the then Major Eisenhower from his officers in the tank corps, and this is the shell of a 3-pounder naval gun. Yeah. Oddly enough, the shell is about twice the size of the shells that the tanks would have fired from their 37mm cannons.
Yeah, and isn't that something? You know, we're always excited to have a Why Like Ike program. I'm always ecstatic about being here because it exposes learning to viewers, and we never know who tunes in. But we're telling people about an American war machine that did not have a tank.
Right.
And that's a French tank.
It's a French tank.
And we never even had but 3 of those until after the war was literally over.
Right.
So Eisenhower, who rose to be 5-star general and president of the United States, was in charge of flatbed trucks and obsolete 3-pounders to train people to go fight the Great War. That's an amazing thought.
And he was good enough at inspiring and training his men that his superiors noticed it and saw it and kept promoting him. His class, his West Point class of 1915 is often called the class the stars fell on because so many graduates became general officers. He was one of only 3 graduates of that class that got promoted as high as lieutenant colonel in World War I.
Okay.
And he was promoted to lieutenant colonel while he was in command of Camp Colt. That was a wartime promotion, a brevet promotion, which means in 1918 he was a lieutenant colonel. In the picture behind us in 1920, he's a captain again. He fairly slowly rebuilt the rank in the interwar years. Eisenhower's World War I experience, much like we're hoping with our viewing audience, was very much a learning experience for him. He learned how to assess men. He learned how to train and inspire men. Apparently, he even learned how to take apart and rebuild the engines of this French tank. He was considered somewhat of a disciplinarian by his men, but he did that to try and keep them busy and occupied.
Well, I've got a thought about that. So you've got 10,000 men in a tank corps, and you gave them the same flatbed truck that they had on their farm before they left, and you strapped a 3-pound Navy obsolete gun to the back of it. It'd be pretty hard to keep general good spirits and discipline without.
Well, it is.
Control.
You've got 10,000 men packed into a very small camp, and you have to keep them motivated and on task. And then Lieutenant Colonel Eisenhower was very, very good at that. He also had to keep them out of the town of Gettysburg and keep them from the hotels and the bars, which he did a good job at. His biggest disappointment of World War I was that he was never sent overseas.
You know, before the cameras came on, we were chit-chatting about some of this stuff, and previously in readings, that comes across. But you know, that's not uncommon for general staff officers that were not sent to war, because that was why they believed they were there.
Right.
I mean, that was their highest calling. But you know, isn't it interesting that his time in World War I gave him great ability to develop management skills?
Yes, it did.
That wartime experience in World War I in the field might not have given him, and he remained alive for World War II.
Right. And it served him and the United States quite well.
Quite well.
His learning at Camp Colt, probably the toughest challenge he faced would have been in October of 1918, when several men in his command started to fall ill with what we now call the Spanish flu. The Spanish flu was quite debilitating, and medical science at the time did not really have any tools to solve the problem. The only way they could solve the problem was isolating people, trying to keep things clean. Eisenhower did such a good job at his camp that out of 10,000 men, only about 175 died of the flu, which is a far lower number than was the average for military camps in the U.S. at the time.
Let's go down that trail just a bit. How many people worldwide died from the Spanish flu, approximately?
Obviously, in 1918, it's difficult to get the numbers. Between 1918 and 1920, estimates range anywhere from 40 million to 100 million people were killed by the Spanish flu.
And in World War I, combat deaths?
World War I combat and civilian deaths, including deaths from the flu, were between 14 and 16 million.
Yeah, isn't that something? While the Great War was going on, the Spanish flu was killing more people.
Spanish flu was killing more people, and it was making things difficult for the generals. The United States, at the beginning of World War I, had a very small professional army of about 250,000 men. By 1918, it had ramped up to 4 million men. But when the Spanish flu hit, it's estimated that at one point, 1 million of those 4 million men was on hospital call because of the flu.
That's amazing.
And the flu killed as many American soldiers in World War I as combat did.
Education is the primary motivation of why Like Ike and why we're here and why you're here every day, is to pass the lessons of history forward. And you know, I'm looking at some that are very important to me. I'll throw them out there.
Right.
So the Renault itself, a French tank that we only had 3 of to train people with. America was underarmed, unprepared, totally not interested in
Right.
fighting World War I, and it shows in how we were prepared.
Right.
That's not a bad thing, to be uninterested in war. But the cost to us of being in a war that we're unprepared for is a totally separate thing.
Well, and World War I is really probably the war in United States history that at least made the military leadership aware of the fact that even if the U.S. wants to remain unencumbered and uninvolved in foreign entanglements, you have to be prepared.
Right.
Because those foreign entanglements will eventually come find you.
Yeah, you know, I think about World War I and a Renault as an example. There was a huge amount of technology that was improved in World War I. The machine gun went to battle, and frankly, that technology, not much changed, is still in use today.
Right.
The exact same weaponry. So,
In fact, this exact tank, the French were still fielded 500 of these in World War II.
Yeah.
They were considered obsolete, and they used them as a last-ditch effort. But even something as obsolete as a World War I tank was still around in World War II. World War I was an interesting mix of the technological and the non-technological. New weapons, tanks, airships, submarines, machine guns, poison gas, changed war into kind of an impersonal wholesale slaughter. Mm-hmm. But kind of the odd result of that is it made it as a very static situation where both sides dug trenches and fought and died by the thousands and millions for literally 200 or 300 yards of land. And so all of these technological marvels on the personal level end up leading to things like the trench spike or trench knife, very personal one-on-one combat,
right.
And in the most brutal of fashion.
We always look at these things as we talk in admiration of the guy on the picture behind us, of his leadership, of his life, of his example as a person. But many times we're faced with the unpleasantness of the time.
Right.
There's nothing about World War I that the world should want to repeat.
Exactly.
Nothing. Other than in the times of greatest need, America has always proven its ability to rise through its ability to innovate, to create, to build, to solve problems. And there's probably no better enduring example of that than Dwight David Eisenhower.
Right.
He was a great problem solver, both technologically, but in managing people and policy and problems.
Right. The ability to manage people is probably as important as the ability to create technology. Eisenhower had a fairly unique ability to inspire people to do things that people don't normally want to do, like go shoot at each other. Mm-hmm. That's not to say that's all he did. A couple of the other little things we have here are kind of fun. The Tank Corps was disbanded in 1920. The military leadership felt that tanks were going to go nowhere, infantry was it. Eisenhower was committed to tanks. In 1920, he was stationed at Fort Meade. And this is a dance card from the final officers' dance of the Tank Corps, held in 1920. And the dance card was donated to us by Mamie Eisenhower,
right.
his, at the time, relatively new wife. And apparently she was quite popular because the dance card is filled. And Ike
filled.
only got 2 of the dances.
Ike only got 2 dances, and they're both foxtrots.
Both foxtrots. Apparently he did not like the one-step.
Well, he must have been a good foxtrotter.
Yes.
Or at least a willing foxtrotter.
And
There is a dichotomy that we look at with Dwight David Eisenhower all the time here. Yes, warrior in a horrible war, but a man who was married, who raised a family, who had a tremendous impact on the persons. You know, we look at World War I here today, but World War I led Mr. Eisenhower to World War II.
Right.
And World War II led Eisenhower to develop the compassionate approach to rebuilding Europe and taking care of the displaced persons.
Right.
You can't separate that because it's the same guy.
yeah, his family life was very important to him, and it was very important in his development as a leader. It definitely gave him insight into the compassionate side and understanding of what these displaced people were going through, what the world was going through at the end of these major cataclysmic upheavals.
You know, I don't think there's been a news story all month long about the Spanish flu. Have you seen one on TV?
No,
me neither.
and that's kind of odd because usually this is the time of year when they bring that back up.
We talk about the flu, but you know, it's one of those things. I think people have heard the Black Plague, you know,
Right.
kind of familiar with that. But the Spanish flu, probably not too many people watching today have heard about the Spanish flu.
And it
killing
was
close to 100 million people.
I've recently been researching it for the upcoming World War I exhibit we're doing. And some of the things that happened in the United States, people would scream today. They shut down entire cities, shut down the trolleys, shut down movie theaters, shut down churches, because the flu was spreading so fast that the health advisors would say, nope, no one can go out. You cannot gather in groups of more than 5. The only exception were the Liberty War Bond drives. You could still meet for those because you still had to pay for World War I.
Still had to buy bonds.
Yep.
Yeah. So we have an example that very few people have heard about, which is Spanish flu in the middle of something almost everybody's heard about, World War I. And this is a great time to talk about. The museum itself is launching a major World War I exhibit upcoming. It's going to last for about a year.
Right.
And it's going to be a fantastic opportunity to take people back into history and look at World War I right here in Abilene, Kansas, with artifacts, with stories, with the opportunity to learn, and frankly, pass that learning and messages on to the young people that come here all the time.
Yeah, well,
Great opportunity.
That's our intent. Our intent with this, we're going to look at World War I, what happened in the war, what Ike's contribution was to it. We've got things like this service hat here is one of Eisenhower's World War I service hats that he would have worn at Camp Colt as a major and a lieutenant colonel.
No, nice hat. I mean, we
it's
had
very
some
nice hat.
hats. This one's interesting.
That is.
We won't be able to read it from afar, but
Right.
it's not interesting because it's anything special. In fact, the varnish came through the picture.
Right.
But what is special about it?
It's basically a standard assignment that Eisenhower signed. He assigned a sergeant to command one of the tank units at Camp Colt. That sergeant felt that it was important enough to mount and varnish, and eventually his estate donated it back to the museum.
Here's why I think that's significant. I think that's just Eisenhower. Eisenhower built talent, and the way you build talent is to find it and give it an opportunity to succeed and to grow. Putting a sergeant in charge of a division is not a normal occurrence.
Yeah.
But he saw something that must have led him to believe that was the right thing to do. I think that's Eisenhower, his genius with people, of putting the people in the right places and dealing with difficult people in a complex. You get Patton on one side and Montgomery on the other. That had to be interesting.
And that's a skill he developed at Camp Colt. He learned to identify potential. He learned to give those people as much responsibility as they could handle, and then a little bit more. And he was also, very quick to get rid of people without potential. There's a case early in Camp Colt where an officer was accused of cheating at poker by marking his cards. So he was turned in. Eisenhower had the cards, called the officer into his office, said, "Do you recognize these?" The officer said no. Eisenhower said, "I'm good at poker. You marked it here, here, and here. You can either resign your commission now or be court-martialed this afternoon." He was a stickler for honor, especially among officers.
I think that's always been a hallmark of what we want for military officers.
Right. Yeah.
But there are people who have been living example of how to do that well, and Eisenhower's one. You think of the challenges of the business he was in, and from World War I to World War II to the presidency. You have to have faith in the people around you, and they have to be willing to do their job and meet those expectations. And he's such a great leader.
And in return, they end up having faith in you. This plaque up front is from a group that still exists a little bit. It's called the World War's Tank Corps Association, and it was, for lack of a better term, kind of an alumni group of people from World War I who had trained as tankers, primarily from Camp Colt. They presented this to Eisenhower at a reunion that they held in Gettysburg in 1962, giving him lifetime membership to the group and making him lifetime president. I don't know if he wanted to be lifetime president. But even all those years later, the men that he had, pushed so hard and trained so hard still liked and respected him enough to present him with these kind of items.
Well, that is I didn't know any of the details of Camp Colt before I walked in today. Knew it happened, knew it was there, knew where it was, but really hadn't thought about it. Didn't know they only had 3 tanks, and they most of the time trained flatbed trucks and 3-inch naval guns or 3-pound naval guns. All of that was new news to me today. What's not new news that you and I get to talk about frequently is that Dwight David Eisenhower was man enough for the job.
Yeah.
Think about World War II. My son, if he were here, would be quick to tell you the Sherman was not the most impressive tank on the battlefield.
Nope.
Germans win that hands down. Yet, battle after battle, strategium after strategery, American Allied tank corps proved their worth and their mettle, and frankly developed such a push through Europe that the Germans could not withstand it. And we're looking at the start of this.
And I think that goes back to needing someone that can develop men as well as technology. The Germans were masters at that. They fielded the first operational jet fighters, but Eisenhower was the one that could push the Western Allies to fight so much better that it overcame superior technology.
And the production on the home front. I know we're about out of time, but Jeff, what a privilege it is to sit here and have you share with us today, and really cool to see the little model of the Renault sitting here. My son will be extremely jealous.
Well, it'll be in the exhibit, which opens in March of 2017.
2017.
We look forward to seeing you all at the Eisenhower Library.
Yeah, we will come. Bring a friend, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, folks, we're happy to talk about why Like Ike, because he was a great leader, and we have his World War I experiences here in front of you. You'll get to see more of this in the upcoming exhibits all next year here at the library. You should come. Bring your grandson with you. Bring your granddaughter with you. Expose them to the great person that Dwight David Eisenhower was. Grew up right here in Abilene, Kansas. Thanks a lot for watching today. We're awfully proud to be here. I'm Dennis Weiss. I work for Eagle Communications. Jeff Nelson works right here for you at the Eisenhower Presidential Library Museum and Boyhood Home. You have a great day.